This video explains why we don't want to work anymore. If you're not interested in our animation, please click on the timestamp as shown on the screen. So, you wanted to see me, Mr. Corpy? Is that it?
Actually, I wanted to see you 15 minutes ago. I'll just assume you had a good reason for keeping your boss waiting.
Listen, look, I'm sorry, Mr. Corpy. Is that your name? Look, I got attacked by my neighbor's dog this morning, and I had to get a shot at the doctor.
I don't care. The reason I asked you here is to give you the benefit of the doubt, to allow you to explain your actions regarding something far more serious.
Okay.
It has been brought to my attention that HR has sent you the company health insurance card not once, not twice, but thrice. Thrice! Do you even understand how serious this is for me to use that word? Why don't you have your insurance card, you insolent little Peabody?
Dude, a fucking dog jumped at me from my mailbox, okay? Can you...
Listen here, bucko. When I started this company 30 years ago, I only had a few grand in winnings from my cockfighting ring and an old Honda Civic with the passenger door missing. I didn't have a pot to piss in or a window to throw it out of, but you know what? I was up early, every morning with the rooster, on time, and I never, ever made my boss have to ask for anything even twice. I clawed my way to the top of my game from meager puppy mill manager to owning the largest greyhound racetrack in the country, complete with an in-house cloning laboratory and execution chamber. Do you know why?
No.
It was in your employee handbook. You should have gotten day 1 here at Cute and Fuzzy Corp. Chapter 3, Section 2, Paragraph 1. I will not make my boss ask thrice. And you signed the contract, Tantris. Yes, you signed the line that was dotted. So what's your excuse? Why shouldn't I fire you right now?
You know, one of the reasons I don't want to go back to America is that it's become a cultureless corporate hellscape where you work more than you should, lack any access to affordable healthcare, unlike the rest of the developed world, and are reminded of how much the system is screwed each time you visit that friend who smokes weed a little too much, mumbling in his smoky haze, "You know, man, if it weren't for this blunt in my hand, I'd have probably deleted myself a long time ago." I don't think using drugs or obliterating yourself with booze is a healthy way to cope with stress, but we all do it when things get difficult. And when I was still there, it felt like all of my friends were in one camp or another to deal with work life. On top of that, the United States, and by extension the entirety of the Western world, is extremely polarized right now. Partisan politics aside, I recently learned that if more than 80% of a population of a given country becomes poor, they all lose any incentive to cooperate with the ruling powers because they essentially have nothing to lose. And to be honest with you, I don't really care. 83 years ago, you had kids lying about their age to enlist during World War II, whereas now you need a well-spoken historian and a lot of alcohol to get most people to care about the sanctity of our nation. Productivity breeds one of the best feelings ever, but corporations don't care about what you want, and the educated elites, whose ideas have shaped a lot of modern bureaucracy, have a raging disdain for the uneducated. The modern day struggles with the depersonalization of culture, too, stripping us of the feeling that we really belong to a particular community there for us in our time of need, which adds to the alienation as we sit in our isolated homes, dissociating about existence and probably watching too much YouTube. I don't want to work a normal job anymore, not because I'm lazy and hate working, quite the opposite. I like being productive and becoming a more refined version of myself by the day, but when that effort feels pointless and in direct contrast to what I do best, I lose interest. I used to have expectations about getting a decent job because I was truly convinced that a degree and the work to back it up would be enough to lay the groundwork for a career. However, I made 2 grave mistakes. From what I've noticed, the Overton window has changed drastically, and no one really cares anymore. But the first was in 2018, when I was openly critical about the paradoxical intolerance of woke politics inside the university, which naturally created enemies with pretty much everybody, barring a few teachers who spoke to me in secret. And 2, when 2020 happened, I was kicked out of my dorm 2 weeks just before the senior job fair, where all the creative companies would come in to interview students and give them jobs, essentially. Meaning, I had no opportunity to make connections. And I truly believed I was going to work for an animation studio like Pixar or something down the line. But nope, my art isn't good enough, and my politics not pure. Honestly, I don't really mind anymore because I'm not interested in working for somebody who hates me for my immutable characteristics anyway. But let's move on. Let's explain why we don't want to work anymore. at least from my perspective. In 2020, I briefly lived at a friend's house to avoid going back home to Wisconsin because I actually thought the
unspecified virus of unknown origin
would only last for the 14 days they claimed. 14 days to stop the thing that rhymes with red. There I saw the lifestyle of working people pretty much for the first time. In that house, all I saw was a place to sleep and do tasks during the day. And since America in particular requires a car for everything, I felt particularly isolated since I wasn't in possession of one at the time. To add insult to injury, the social scape was dead after things shut down that year. And nothing has felt the same since the transition to the post-2020 paradigm. There was a realization for me, because there, in Cranston, Rhode Island, where I was living, it appeared like it was struggling to get by, despite probably once having been a booming town for young families. It had become a pretty dead part of the state, full of quiet houses inhabited by equally quiet people, paying rent and mortgages to their hungry landlords. But I came to see this in other parts of the United States as well. One of my roommates worked at a pizza joint, while the other was a computer programmer from home. I also had a friend who worked at a satellite factory, and if I'm remembering correctly, all three of them would spend their day doing something they hardly liked for pretty average money, and then end their routine either with some video games or streaming services before starting all over again the next day. The monotony of it all really got to me during those first few months of 2020, where I'd wake up in the morning, go outside to view the neighborhood on a walk, and just see an empty road full of potholes. Nothing changed, like I was waiting for some street party to happen or a community to suddenly appear so I didn't have to sigh in disappointment as I would go back inside to surf the web again. I was also shocked for the worse when a friend of mine and I went for a drive down to Newport to see the mansions there. That's when I really started to realize that the rich people in this country have more wealth than we can even fathom. You can open up any social media platform on your phone and see these celebrities in their nice cars, other influencers in their big, beautifully lit houses, enjoying these lifestyles you and I are probably never going to know. And they're right there in Newport, Rhode Island. Maybe in the past, celebrities were hailed as representatives of pop culture. Most of us just see them as vehicles for the values of the elite now. The gap has become palpable, and most of us are either angry, depressed, or feeling alienated due to the lack of opportunity for social mobility. And now, to me, many of them are nothing more than a representation of the wealth gap in the country right now. I know many of them are at the top. They don't care, and they'll never know about my existential malaise, which is exactly why I don't feel any motivation to give them my all. If the dominant culture hates me, why should I try? I wanted out, but when I went home to Wisconsin from Rhode Island that summer, I was met with the same thing. Crappy job opportunities, outdated advice from older people, and an existential nausea. Before our time, people had a family, and their own people they would know for the majority of their lives, developing strong bonds with them and adding to their sense of community. Now most of us are just some person in the place he or she lives, working somewhere else half the day as a disconnected individual. I don't believe life is about work, but far more. And I think it's a sick irony that we simultaneously all seem to recognize the dystopian feeling of the globalized corporate world we've allowed to develop, and yet still have a staunch, almost ideological support for that global market without considering the need to support your local community more than the megacorporations. Materialism decides everything now. It's just as the narrator in Fight Club said, when deep space exploration ramps up, it'll be the corporations that name everything. The IBM Stellosphere, the Microsoft Galaxy, Planet Starbucks. You get so many fiscal conservatives coming at you with this antiquated mindset where you should pull yourself up by your bootstraps and live a life for your family, miserable or not, calling you an ungrateful shitlib if you so much as say that we ought to have more free times for ourselves to enjoy our life outside of the workplace. I am for family. I'm for all of that, but we need to come together again. Number 2, no time to really enjoy life. According to Johann Hari's Lost Connection, only 13% of Americans find their jobs engaging. And that coupled with the amount of debt young people are actually facing now, it's really a wonder how in the living hell anyone is dealing with the current circumstances and not going insane. If you like to work hard, go ahead, and maybe you'll be very successful in life because you're willing to withstand the ridiculous barriers between you and finding something worth working for. But it takes an unnatural amount of willpower to succeed nowadays. Whereas in the 50s, you could graduate with a high school degree, find a decent job as a factory worker, raise a family, and even buy a house. It was a different era. Speaking of which, my father was a very conscientious man and used to eat breakfast with me in the morning, saying cheerful things like, "You know, Tantris, I like Mondays." To which, of course, I'd question his sanity and ask why. And he'd tell me, because Monday morning is the beginning of a productive day full of hard work and satisfaction, or something to that effect. But to me, a solid portion of life is meant for the enjoyments of the everyday, going on vacation, seeing the world, reading books, making friends, having conversations, and doing things which expand your worldview when you're not at work. and I'm pretty sure he's in the minority there. But dear viewer, what do you need for those leisurely activities? Time. And enough of it so that you can discover the world for yourself and not work in a tiny box struggling to get a day off months in advance like most Americans. Here's an idea. I bet we'd all be so much happier if we extended the weekend by one day. Just think about all the creative people who would benefit with that time to think about new things, ideas, and inventions we've not yet heard of. I think it's important to recall that in the not-so-distant past, college was universally accepted as the route for social mobility, and some have forgotten that going to college isn't some admission that you are a hyper-progressive who is a bootlicker of the elite. Don't get me wrong, I made a whole video about why going to college was the worst decision of my entire life, although that was just a parody of Nathaniel Drew. I was just being facetious at the time. Many just want good opportunities, and while they may be misguided, the amount of content I'm seeing where people are making fun of college grads who still can't find a job is popular now. It's still screwed up that despite the hours so many put into their education, which by the way our parents forced down our throats since we were kids, many barely have enough money to enjoy themselves other than an occasional trip to the mall or something on the weekend. And that's assuming that they have a car, are healthy, and have friends willing to go with them. Number 3, the fading of college as a non-partisan institution from public consciousness. There was this video that kind of hit both sides of an argument I have with myself. Not everyone works hard. Some people prefer their leisure, but some people want to work 80 hours a week. Obviously, I don't necessarily have a problem in principle if someone is doing a job that requires a lot more cognitive horsepower and gets paid more than someone working at a pizza restaurant. But since we dealt with so much prosperity over the course of the 20th century, the decline is becoming apparent, and at the very least, I don't want to head in the opposite direction where people who work at a pizza joint are essentially in poverty. There's this video showing a poor guy trying to get people to sign for UBI, while this capitalist-loving dude named Eliezer Perez tells him his degree and market value are both worthless in the end.
Universal basic income to Oregon?
Oh, no, we don't believe in that.
You don't believe in that?
No.
Okay, why not?
We believe in free markets. We believe in getting paid what you deserve.
I have 10 years explicit pizza experience, right?
Uh-huh.
I can't make more than $2 or $3 over minimum wage, even with that experience, because nobody will actually pay what my labor is worth. So how does that fit into your...
To my belief.
Yeah.
Because I believe that if you have a skill that isn't so much in demand, the market's going to pay you in direct proportion with that. If you have a skill that's high in demand, let's say Elon Musk, right? SpaceX, Tesla, stuff that is actually highly in demand, stuff that brings a specific amount of value to the marketplace, then they're going to reward you off that.
Okay, how about my bachelor's in environmental science?
So degrees aren't really as useful as people would think. They're more an authority claim. So
Okay, so then why should people go to college?
well, I don't think they should.
You don't
Who
think they should?
told you that?
I mean, the entire society told me to do that when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And I went to school and I got a degree.
Uh-huh. Well, who told you that?
I mean, the entire society told me to do that when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And I went to school and I got a degree.
Uh-huh.
But clearly there's something not working in that when a man gets a degree in environmental science, he shouldn't be working as a pizza guy. Either A, he's unfortunate and the job market is truly unfair, or B, he's incompetent and was just barely lucky enough to get a higher education in the first place. Either way, there's a problem, albeit two different kinds. And this poor guy actually looks like he might be nice. This felt like an interaction that didn't have to be hostile. And it may not look it, but when you see how everything is framed, yeah, in my opinion, the finance bro content usually irritates the living hell out of me because it usually just strengthens my impression that they don't care if other people who don't want to devote themselves to finance like them should suffer. But I guess it had me thinking. College education could still be valuable in the market if we learn how to do a number of things. So here's another idea. Maybe the proper medium between these two extremes is requiring that the cost of a college degree be directly proportional to the economic value of the field of study itself. A medical degree would be a lot more expensive than one in environmental science or education, but if you looked at the average salary in the field and did the math, why not price degrees based on that? College graduates probably feel entitled to a good job because of the time and money they spent to prepare themselves to enter the workforce, only to come out realizing the world is a different place. While academia pisses me off for a variety of reasons, many of the kids enrolling are the first in their family to go to school, expecting some degree of social mobility. Of course, many of the schools will indoctrinate them with a lot of extremist ideas along the way, and it only adds to the bad reputation many of them get after leaving the school. But I still have sympathy for those who went because they wanted a better future. That's why I went, and I honestly didn't even know what woke culture was before I went to school. I was a left-leaning artsy kid in high school, but little did I know how much more extreme the East Coast would be compared to the swing state of Wisconsin. I know my audience is very smart, and I assume that most of you would be better off in a field where you're dealing consistently constantly with problems that require a certain level of high-level abstraction. I would prefer a society where we advocate for a neutral university environment like we used to, a place diverse in ideas, for those who like to deepen their understanding of the universe and argue with equally intelligent folk who can help them sharpen their worldview. Those who are more hands-on should go to trade school to acquire a skill, something they will appreciate a lot more than the ideas of a liberal arts education, likely inapplicable to the career path that would suit them best. Of course, plunging yourself into tens of thousands of dollars of debt out of pure risk is such a stupid wager now that I don't blame anybody for skipping out on higher education, due to the lack of high-paying jobs waiting for you at the other end. The amount of debt students have probably discourages them from believing they can be successful in life, like a psychological impediment of some sort. It's really interesting how such a rift has developed between the upper and lower classes in the education system. Because when I was younger, say 15, 18 years ago, it seemed like parents of all classes just wanted their children to receive a better education than their own. And if doing well in school meant that were possible, it didn't matter your family background. Smart people of all social groups were promised a good education, provided they had the right grades and work ethic. Whereas now, working class people from middle America are usually considered stupid due to being uneducated and holding antiquated ideas, which may be a threat to democracy if they're not vocal about their support for the most socially approved values. I grew up around truckers, fast food workers, coffee shop baristas, and construction workers. Hell, I worked in a fast food restaurant for a year and learned just how little customers actually care about you behind the register. Anyone who hasn't worked a fast food job in their life should try it when they're young, just to see how horribly you can be treated. In my case, I developed a massive respect for those who deal with that every day, and thus I almost always say please and thank you with a genuine smile when going out, unless the service is noticeably terrible. The amount of condescension on the working class is obviously contributing to the overall resentments of the American people. Take a look at some of these images. When you're a young man of Western European ancestry in the modern West, there's pretty much nobody who feels bad for you. The elite hates and want to portray you in as negative a light in any way possible. I mean, why would you want to work for anyone who hates you? Where in the hell would your motivation come from outside of wanting to support a family? Number 3.5, the agony of job interviews and job hunting. Here's a quick rant. You know what really grinds my gears? The lack of transparency from employers during interviews. It's frustrating to participate in what feels like a meaningless competition where you're already expected to conform to certain standards without any insight into their decision-making process. The whole experience is completely disheartening and pressure-filled, like this one interview I did where the employer dubbed good candidates as gems, like she's always looking for them, before the thing even started. Like, way to add pressure on me, lady. Am I not a gem to you? In these interviews, it often feels like our personalities don't matter. We're just assessed based on whether or not we fit the criteria on the checklist. Sure, that's fair game, fine, it's capitalism. But young people receive so little freaking encouragement ever nowadays. We're always the oppressors, the R words, the S words, whatever you want to call us if we're not educated enough to express an opinion thereon. How are we supposed to muster the motivation to keep applying if we're left in the dark and barely noticed, except for when they send rejection mail? Interviews seem to encapsulate everything I dislike about human interaction in 20 minutes. The fakeness, the time consumption, the sheer pointlessness. It's particularly frustrating when you feel like you've had a good interview because you know you have the proper experience and the proper skills, only to be met with a rejection, with no explanation. I even sent this one employer back with an email saying, "Hey, I still enjoyed our time and hope to remain in contact," or something to that effect. But nope, nothing, rejected. Screw off, you're done. It's like they don't care. So on top of sending hundreds of resumes to a bunch of companies you likely don't even want to work for anyway, the interviews are painful, and the reality that most of us have to wear a face we don't want to, only for it to be rejected about 6 times out of 10, is completely soul-crushing. If you don't want to hire anyone but a small portion of the population, and then treat the rest of them like they're absolute garbage despite the skills they likely possess, they're gonna drop out and quit. Number 4, nihilism's role in the disappearance of monoculture. As George Carlin said, they call it the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it. Let's talk about the cultural zeitgeist now. Take The Simpsons, for example. At the time of the show's peak popularity, Homer was considered a loser. A loser who still had enough time to go on vacation about once a year, living in a decently sized house in a nice neighborhood, had many children, and a stay-at-home wife. Talk about a difference between the 1990s and now. Anyone living like that in 2024 is generally pretty well off, especially in the bigger cities. Now, modern media, like Rick and Morty, focus more on the nihilism and meaningless of existence, because nothing binds us to anything now, unlike then, which I think is a good representation of the sociology of young people today. Of course, Rick and Morty hosts its own middle-class family, though whereas The Simpsons focused on the spirit of its time, the dynamic of Rick and Morty focuses on ours. At one point in the first season, they irrevocably destroy their dimension so much that Rick and Morty have to travel to a different one, where everything is identical to the previous one, except for the fact that their parallels accidentally kill themselves in the garage at just the right moment for them to replace themselves, giving them a second chance at life. There's even a scene where they bury themselves in the backyard, and the entire time you're hooked, as the show gets you thinking despite how you may consider yourself a unique person, you could just be another version of yourself in an infinite amount of universes, showcasing different variations thereof. I think The Simpsons was a show which spoke to our collective humanity, whereas Rick and Morty speaks to our collective sense of pervasive nihilism. As much as we don't want to admit it, we are tribal and need something around which to congregate. When there's a lack of common values or someone with whom to share a common enemy, what exactly do you do? What do you have? I have no answer to that question, and I'm skeptical of the paradoxical idea that we can all live in the same place with completely different personal values, going to work pretending that everything is okay as we follow the robotic, inflexible rules of the megacorporations. I get the impression capitalists love materialism insofar as they don't give a damn about immaterial cultural things. It's just money, profits, the economy, a sort of ontological starting point for all discussions in the modern day. But work cannot replace culture. But all we have is work, and that is why I think so many of us feel empty. There's nothing for us to circle around, to feel like we're connected. There isn't even a monoculture anymore, which might have helped the country feel a bit more together than what we have today. 30 years ago, most people were familiar with the same pop culture. When the Beatles were big, everyone listened, or at least knew who they were. The same went for The Cure, Michael Jackson, Led Zeppelin, movies coming out like Star Wars, Jaws, and Indiana Jones. Now with the internet, you can like what you like, listen to what you want to listen to, and that part is personalized, but it's so personalized that nothing at all defines the greater culture. I'm hesitant to complain about that, I suppose, because in some ways it is easier to find like-minded people, but with the fracturing of everything, there will be some consequences. Consequences I'm not qualified enough to predict, but I will say that there will probably be some major paradigm shifts ahead of us in our lifetime regarding the meaning of culture, the meaning of monoculture, the meaning of polyculture. That's what I think fuels the nihilism and kills our incentive to want to be a part of anything, because with the death of religion, the only things we've had to replace it are politics and the economy. If you think it's possible, I'm open to hearing your viewpoints, but as an agnostic person, I've gone from arguing against the existence of God to essentially letting conservatives stand up for their heritage and culture because I don't really have any better equivalent to propose. Either way, its death is contributing to the psychological death of everything. Either way, I think all of this is contributing to some sort of psychological death of modern humanity. Number 5, the world looked better back then and we know it. Open up your YouTube page and look at how the modern world is doing. You'll see videos of people like Cash Jordan explaining how New York has become so expensive that not even New Yorkers themselves can afford it. Moreover, millions are pouring in from elsewhere who probably can't even feed themselves, often called economic migrants, who, like I said, tend to drive down the cost of labor. No hard feelings to them as people, but overall, it sounds like a pretty bleak situation. I've also remarked that vintage footage has become popular on the internet these days, such as New York in 1920, 1940, etc., or Paris 1960, sometimes even going as far back as the 19th century. And take a look at the cleanliness of the streets and the overall vibe of some of the people. The citizens just emanate a light you don't see nowadays. The term late-stage capitalism is currently thrown around a lot to describe our era, and it's interesting that we all sort of seem to already know exactly what that means when you see it on YouTube. You're already struggling to get by as inflation increases, and the actual value of your work is plummeting, going down the drain, in an environment which continues to look more and more like a cyberpunk movie of the 80s, where the only smiles you see during the day are in advertisements meant to get you to buy things you don't need. And they're plastered all around with celebrities like George Clooney smiling, attempting to manipulate you to buy whatever the product is on display. And this happens to me in Tokyo sometimes when I'm waiting for the train. But again, I digress. Number 6. Conclusion. Modernity is often credited for raising the standard of living compared to previous eras, but if we take a look, we've actually found that it's dropped pretty significantly since the post-World War II era. 2/3 of Americans couldn't afford a surprise $500 payment today. They want you to go above and beyond, but they don't pay above and beyond. And having grown up with many who often complain about how lazy people don't want to work, I'll admit that if you give me a project I actually care about, a domain in which I'd actually like to improve, I'll work on it all day, every day, and keep it going. But instead, even with a college degree, Even with the right intelligence, millions of very talented and capable Zoomers are going out in the workforce only to find jobs that barely pay, and certainly don't give a rat's ass about them. In the end, the issue I think bothers me most is that we're slowly becoming so individualized that no one was talking to each other anymore. We barely know what it means to be American, and that's where I'll say that community is gone, and the only thing left is our economy. Will the community come back? I'm not sure if the internet could ever allow that, and there's no real solution to the problem I could say at the moment, other than to be aware of the important aspects of life that our ancestors knew before the world became what it is today. I feel like I've generally covered my impression on this topic of not wanting to work anymore. So if this video struck a chord with you, I always appreciate a subscription. In any case, that's all I've got for today. Cheers, and stay awesome.